It's not as easy as saying, let me take this pet off the shelf and use it and it's going to solve all my problems. It's not. It takes a lot of work. I'm hoping that changes in the course of the future as technologies become easier to use. But figuring out which pet to use and why you're using that pet is a challenge that most companies face.
Welcome to Privacy in Practice, the podcast where we bring you the latest insights, practical solutions, and real-world stories from the world of data protection and privacy. I'm Kellie Dupree.
And I'm Danie Strachan. Privacy in Practice is brought to you by VeriSafe, your trusted partner in privacy and data protection. In this podcast, we dig into the challenges and opportunities in privacy compliance, from navigating complex regulations to building a sustainable privacy program that works for your business, not against it.
So let's jump in and get practical with privacy. Today, we are very excited to welcome Monisha Varadan to the podcast. Monisha is a senior privacy engineer who sits in the DPO office at Google and has over 20 years of experience working across various industries and geographies.
In her role as an EMEA Privacy Lead, Monisha is responsible for shaping privacy strategy and engagement and overseeing privacy initiatives in a region with diverse privacy laws. Previously, she was head of Chrome partnerships for APAC and has extensive experience working with global teams to build privacy-first solutions.
Today, we are going to take advantage of Monisha's expertise in privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs. We're hoping Monisha can help us all understand how to leverage these cutting-edge technologies in a rapidly expanding world of complex data governance. Welcome, Monisha.
Thank you.
It's so nice to meet you, Monisha. EMEA Privacy Lead at Google, what does it involve?
That is indeed me. Yes, my title says EMEA Privacy Lead. I'm actually based in Paris. My title within Google is a senior privacy engineer. I actually sit in the DPO office. And like most tech companies, the DPO office actually sits in a larger product and engineering org called Privacy, Safety, and Security. And that team is responsible for our central privacy infrastructure. So I suppose it tells you a little more about how Google is set up from a privacy perspective, from a DPO office perspective. We just inherently just lean on technology for solutions when it comes to privacy challenges that we're trying to solve for. And so, yes, this group coordinates across multiple privacy groups at Google, as you can imagine, privacy group for Gmail and cloud and YouTube and maps and all these other product areas. My role is very much EMEA focused, and I have been spending a lot of time talking about pets.
Before Google, I know you've worked quite a few other places in countries as well. So not just always EMEA, other regions of the world as well, and in different kind of privacy roles. What's something that you wish you had known when you started, sort of in your first role, that you know now, but maybe it would have been nice to know back then?
I think privacy is a word that you kind of take for granted in that your understanding of privacy exists, but how you live your life from a privacy perspective is not something that one looks at and questions. And I think the role over the last 6 or 7 years that I've spent in privacy has made me realize quite how personal privacy can be. And what privacy is to me may not be privacy to you. Growing up in a different cultural context, that's exactly what I experienced. I'm not sure I understood what privacy was in an Indian setting where everyone could walk through your doors. But now living in Europe, I think privacy means something completely different. And so that kind of links into a new learning for me as I'm talking to companies. I'm realizing that privacy is a cultural change process as much as it is a technical change process. And I think if I had those insights, I may have been a little more sensitive about how I'd approached privacy across regions.
I do think that in the American context too, we think of data as sort of a commodity, as something that it can be owned or sold. Not the same cultural context in Europe for user data. I think, as you say, it's very much thinking of it as a understanding where people are coming from when they speak about privacy helps you think not only about things like the end user's expectations or the data subject's expectations, but also the people you work with expectations and hangups and change management frustrations and things like that.
So today we're talking about pets. We're not talking about our cats and dogs and the goldfish, but privacy enhancing technologies. So pets are tools that organizations use to protect and respect people's privacy while using that data. So I saw an interesting analogy the other day. Someone said pets are almost like sunglasses. You're protected against the sun, but you can still see. Another analogy that I saw, and maybe just to explain the topic a little bit more, one type of privacy enhancing technology is encryption. And to use an analogy there, Encryption would be the difference between sending a postcard or sending a letter within an envelope. So if you're sending the postcard, you write a message on the back of the postcard, everyone can see it along the postal chain. But if you put it inside something and you seal it, then only you can see the contents and the recipient. In simple terms, that's an example of a privacy-enhancing technology. So you can share data with other organizations, but you protect it in such a way that everyone along the chain can't also read the message. In your view, what are pets, Monisha? Can you give us practical examples of how you see pets?
Yeah, sure. I think how you described it is perfect. Essentially, there are a set of tools that allow you to process sensitive data in a way that is privacy preserving, that allows you to achieve the end objective, but also allows you to protect underlying user privacy. And yes, like you pointed out, some of these have been in existence for ages. People have been doing encryption, anonymization, pseudonymization, but I think it's more recently that people are starting to bucket it into a set of tools. Also because I think pets are becoming more sophisticated. So there have been new advances, new developments over the last few years as the user expectation on data has changed. I think people are getting more comfortable about giving their data and data being processed, but the user expectation on privacy and trust has not changed. And so user expectation and trust continues to center around the fact that if you use my data, you've got to protect it and preserve it and treat it carefully. But pets shouldn't just be seen as a mechanism to comply with regulation or comply with your privacy expectations. Conversation is starting to become more about business enablement. So there are use cases that were previously impossible because of the challenges around data use that are becoming more and more possible with the use of pets. So people in organizations who are thinking about how to refer to this technology can also look at it from the angle of, is this solving a business purpose that I can talk to my revenue teams about or my C-level teams about?
Right. I like what you said there about enabling. So one could get the impression that pets lock away data and make it more difficult to use the data, but that's actually not the point. It is a tool that helps you to actually support innovation and to grow and to leverage and use the data while you're protecting privacy. It's not a hurdle that you're creating for yourself. It's actually a springboard that you create to help you get more out of the data that you have, but not to infringe more on people's privacy at the same time.
I just want to call out right at the beginning of the conversation that it's not a silver bullet. It's not as easy as saying, let me take this pet off the shelf and use it and it's going to solve all my problems. It's not. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of iteration. I'm hoping that changes in the course of the future as technologies become easier to use. But figuring out which pet to use and why you're using that pet is a challenge that most companies face. It's a very real challenge.
One thing I heard about pets that I also quite like from a practical privacy professional perspective is the pet is what you consider at the end of a DPIA or as part of a legitimate impact assessment. It's something that you have to think about in the context of mitigating, enhancing mitigating risk. But to your point, Monisha, that doesn't mean it's then solved, right? You have to think of it in this larger context of, yeah, okay, so fine, we want to process data in this way. Could we pseudonymize it? Could we, by default, hash user data? But then you have to do it. Then you have to examine how to do it. There have always been technical solutions, but they get more and more complex. And then that needs to be considered in the broader context of the privacy analysis that can be helpful if you're trying to use legitimate interest.
But I would say you probably should think about it way before you do a DPIA. You should probably be thinking about it right point when you have an idea to develop a product and you're thinking and using data. If it's very integral to the culture or the product development process, it becomes quite instinctive and intuitive on thinking about pets right at the early stages of the journey. And that makes it much easier than figuring out what you want to build and how you want to get there, doing your DPIs, and then realizing there's a privacy problem you're trying to fit. Then you're retrofitting a solution. And I think that's much harder.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And it goes to this next point about the difference between privacy by design and a pet.
Which is a great point because they're linked, obviously. And I think privacy by design is a GDPR thought process, philosophy that a lot of companies think about and want to put in place. And so for me, it's more the what and the why of how you think about product development. But pets is actually the suite of tools that can help you get there. So it's the how of ensuring that privacy by design exists in an organization.
It's become interesting how many conferences have pets on their agendas. I recall attending a session last year, for example, where there was a topic dedicated to the use of pets in the mental privacy space. Why has it become so popular? What is the reason for the increasing interest?
You're very right. We're doing a half-day workshop in San Diego at IAPP to cover pets as well. For sure, there's definitely a lot more interest. I will say that you go back to the history of pets, I think it has been quite inaccessible. It stayed in the labs for a very long time, even at Google. Some of our forefront researchers and thought leaders were developing pets and new types of pets, but taking that into an industry context and getting companies to implement was very, very hard. Even when we launched some of our EP libraries, it was hard for people to understand how they could use it. They saw the beauty, but it was hard to implement. But I think it's getting more and more popular for a number of reasons. I think there's been that merge between legal compliance and tech, right? And I think if you're thinking of scaling privacy, then this is some of the technology that you should be thinking about. And scaling privacy is a very real problem that some of the larger companies have. In a world of AI and data use, where privacy issues have come to the forefront, I think pets are a very clear way of tackling some of those issues. For companies that are grappling with AI governance, most of the DPOs are sitting there thinking, God, AI governance, where do I get started? How do I get started? I think pets is, again, one of those enablers, one of the things that they can think about. I've also started seeing a shift in the industry. So you've gone from the largest companies talking and thinking about pets to startups building the plumbing and tooling that the companies require to make that final leap into the world of pets. And I think that has enabled the conversation to become more accessible as well, because now you have companies who are building pets for healthcare or companies building pets for financial services. And that makes it much easier to develop real life use cases that people can understand and experience, and makes the conversation a lot more fun, obviously.
Can I just ask quickly for some people that don't know, what are the libraries?
So differential privacy is a type of pet. A few years ago, we actually set up these libraries, the differential privacy libraries, that allow you to take advantage of the technology based on the data set that you have. So you might have a data set, you might have a use case. You can tap into the libraries to build that use case out and then use it in your own company and organization. But we've got quite a few open source pets repositories that one can take advantage of if you made that leap into the technical world.
You kind of touched on this, but just to maybe elaborate a little bit more. Obviously, AI is moving very quickly. Regulators, I think, are more comfortable with regulating it than others. Some are more concerned about it than others. And a huge element of it is just, of course, the data governance piece. There's just so much data involved in training an AI system and using it, et cetera. And so I think perhaps that rapid growth and the sheer volume of data has impacted the urgency around adopting pets.
I think it's exactly what you said, right? I think there's an acknowledgement that data fuels the world of AI. These systems require vast, diverse data sets to be trained and fine-tuned effectively. But the bigger and more varied the data set gets and the more powerful and accurate these AI models become, the privacy issues rise to the forefront. It's about how you're using that data. Are you protecting the data? Does it have PII? What controls are you giving the users? And I think that's the conflict. AI needs data, but that conflicts with the core privacy principle of data minimization, which is collecting only what is necessary. And so a lot of this data could be personal, could be sensitive, but without pets, if you didn't have tooling in place that allowed you to consider the option of using data in a privacy-preserving way, a lot of the AI developments may not have been possible from a privacy perspective. But it is a conversation that's very much ongoing, changing, shifting. I think AI developers are just now talking about what the privacy implications are. And so as you go to more conferences and learn about this, you'll see a lot of change in that very same conversation. There's level of questions from users. I think there are questions from regulators. And it has gone from being a niche academic topic into, a practical necessity of sorts.
One thing a prior guest, Shane, said, who was at Meta, you have to be really careful not to think of AI exceptionalism. You have to think of AI as just another technology. It's another tool. It needs the same privacy principles apply to.
Exactly. Used in various other ways for various other use cases. But yes, I think Shane was absolutely right. I think what we forget, and I keep saying this to many privacy professionals, we have the basis of how to think about AI because we've got the basis of privacy from a data protection perspective. And that sets us up in good stead when you're thinking through AI governance or looking at the risks or thinking about the privacy. But just because it's a new shiny thing, it doesn't mean it completely changes the conversation. I think the privacy professionals today, the DPOs today, are well grounded in a thought process that allows you to navigate this new world.
So you want to think about the privacy principles. You want to minimize privacy, there's a pet for that. You want to implement technical and organizational measures, there are pets for that too. You think about the inherent basic GDPR principles, purpose limitation, considering, again, that legitimate interest assessment, weighing the balancing test. These are pieces of technology that can just assist in meeting those fundamental principles by making it a little bit less invasive or having a little bit less data or less of a risk if there's a data breach, things like that. And I think that applies across the whole world of data.
I will say two things. I don't mean to be a damp squib, but A, there's a correlation between the GDPR principles and what pets can do, but they're not connected. So using a pet doesn't mean that somehow you've ticked a GDPR box. That's not how it works. You've got to rethink how you're using the pet, how you're using the data, etc. And the second thing is, I wish it was as easy as saying, I'm just trying to minimize data usage and so I can use this pet, or I'm trying to, anonymize or use this pet. Again, it's not that simple. There's a big gap between conceptual pets and practical pets. We're trying to build the bridges in that world, but it's not as simple as it sounds. However, I don't want to put any legal person off this podcast or off pets, because that progress is happening. It's slow and you can get there. So if you're a legal person listening to the podcast, definitely go and investigate pets.
I think that's why perhaps they're called privacy enhancing technologies instead of yeah, privacy complete tick box. Speaking of complexity, Google. Privacy compliance, I mean, the scale is enormous. You just mentioned it earlier in the podcast. Many of the products at issue, it's not just the products, it's obviously the types of data processing, et cetera. Obviously, there's many ways to go about solving privacy. We've sort of alluded to some of them already. How does Google and how does your team kind of align on the approach to prioritize, the value system? How do you go about starting to tackle the immense complexity of privacy compliance at scale?
First of all, we've been on a journey for many years. I think Google has had to think about privacy challenges for many, many years. And we've been lucky that we started out with the idea that we would have some fundamental privacy principles in place. And so that's been our guiding North Star for most of the product teams. Having said that, it is a fine balance to strike, because we've got all these various product areas. We've got all these privacy teams sitting in each product area. Each product area has a different goal, has a different objective, utility, different regulations, different regions, different devices. So outlining the complexity in itself is challenging. But to help make these decisions, we go through a process of evaluating multiple things, as you would do in any product company. What are the technical implications? What is the feasibility? What are the costs? What are the regulatory requirements? What are user preferences that we need to take into account? What are the potential risks? And all of this is made in alignment with the wider privacy policy, the privacy principles that we have, the use case that you're trying to meet. And obviously we're looking at scale, because you've got whatever you build cannot be built for 10 people or 100 people or even 1,000 people. This is a billion user type problem that you're trying to solve. But yes, a lot of thought goes into it. We have the central privacy infrastructure teams helping some of that process. But I would say I'm quite proud of what we have.
That's awesome.
Moving from theory to practice, is there an example that you can share of how Google has used a privacy enhancing technology to solve a privacy challenge at scale?
Yes, we do this a lot. Like I said, it's quite integral to the privacy process in the product development sense at Google. So we're lucky that our product teams work very closely with our privacy teams to make these decisions. And so you see pets cropping up in many, many instances. If you take phone and you look for a restaurant and you go into the restaurant little knowledge panel and you look for this thing called busyness times, you can actually decide whether you want to go, visit the Louvre or go to your favorite restaurant based on the crowds that you might observe on that map's data point. We're introducing a layer of noise, and it gives us the information we need without actually revealing details about the person. We just need to know a certain outcome, and that can be enabled by the use of pets.
That's really useful, because I think for many people, this is a very theoretical topic and they can't really imagine how this can play out in practice. But many people use the Google services, and many of them would be interested in knowing how practically Google uses these technologies to protect them in ways in which many people might feel exposed or think, I don't want to use this service because what about my privacy? And I think many people are worried about that because people feel They don't want to use these products because their data is going to end up somewhere. It's nice to know that these technologies are available and that they are being used. I just want to discuss another analogy here because sometimes it's difficult to explain some of these concepts, but when it comes to federated learning, something happens on the device. It's not sent, it's not stored centrally, but someone compared it to a classroom setting where you have to hand your homework in to the teacher. So there is the option of everyone taking their books and sending it to the front, and everyone can see your homework, and it ends up on the teacher's desk, or the teacher can come to each desk and mark it there, and it stays in your book and no one else can see it. Found that example quite useful.
I like those examples as well because I think it requires a crispness and a thoughtfulness on the part of the company in thinking through, what do we need actually? What is the point of collecting this data? Like with the busyness example, we don't actually need to know which individual was standing in front of the Mona Lisa, to use the Louvre example. We need to know how many people were there. And I think that that's a piece that privacy compliance can be so complicated. I don't want to say it's overlooked because it seems like so obvious it shouldn't be, but I feel like sometimes it is.
And we use that exact feature in our COVID-19 report. So helping governments through a very difficult period when they needed to know where there were crowds and where they needed to raise alerts and alarms. I think that exact same feature helped with COVID-19 mobility reports. It's deprecated now as a product, but it was a very, very impactful use case where pets was used to solve a global challenge.
Incredible. Danie, I'm going to test your analogy ability here, or maybe Monisha, I'll give you a shot here. Can we talk about another somewhat complicated technical concept, and that's synthetic data? Can you talk a little bit about the role that synthetic data, especially this differentially private synthetic data, can play in protecting privacy?
Yes, synthetic data has been a buzzword for a while, especially in the world of AI. I think a lot of people have been talking about it. It's not that new a development per se, but it does involve creating a completely artificial data set that mimics the properties and patterns of a real sensitive data set. Now, the challenge with synthetic data on its own is that personal information can sneak in. So differentially private synthetic data uses differential privacy on top of the synthetic nature of the data set to make it more private. And then this can be used for analysis or model training and research without actually exposing private information.
I think the closest analogy that I could get in a few seconds for synthetic data is the crash test dummy they use when they simulate accidents. You have the test dummy, it's like a human, it acts like a human, but it's not a human, so you can put them in the car and bang them against the wall and see what happens without injuring them. We actually talked about synthetic data in the context of clinical trials with another guest the other day, because clinical trials are so heavily regulated, and sometimes you just want to test out some kind of procedure or some form of medication. And if you can test it on non-human data or totally de-identified data, and if that can get to the result that you want to, that's so much less privacy invasive than going through a full-scale clinical trial and letting people go to a hospital and drawing their blood and doing the tests. So I think synthetic data is useful in all sorts of settings, maybe not just in AI, but I think now it's become very useful in AI to train models. Obviously, it depends on the quality of your data. Otherwise, you might have a lopsided model.
As Kellie was saying earlier, I think it goes back to sitting down and thinking about, what do you really need here? Do you need all that personal information? What sort of data do you need? Could you find it somewhere else? Could you build it in other ways? And I think that's the privacy thought process that's gaining traction.
I loved your other Google examples. Could you maybe give us an example of how Google's used a synthetic data set?
Well, we have started using, when you get spam messages in your SMS and you want a spam filter, you want something to block that spam. We needed to train a model to recognize what was spam and what was not by training it on real messages. But of course, real messages are very sensitive and private. And so we have trained a model on differentially private synthetic data so that the model can understand what is spam and what is not. And it runs, again, on device. Anonymization is critical here.
When it comes to synthetic data, it sounds like an amazing, useful tool, but I think there are also some drawbacks, some risks. Could you name any.
With purely synthetic data, I think biggest risk is that it leaks sensitive information, which of course can be addressed by the use of pets like differential privacy. When you are building a synthetic data set based on a real set of data, there is the possibility that PII can creep in. There are also other types of inference attacks where there is a deliberate attacker, an adversary who wants to establish if there's a specific individual with specific data points that was used to train the set, and so you can question the model or deduce sensitive information about this individual, or even reconstruct some of this data by attacking the synthetic data set. So there are, like any technology, any new development, there are risks. But again, we're talking about synthetic data, not differentially private synthetic data.
When it comes to implementing these technologies, I get the sense that they are intimidating, that people feel they don't know where to start. Why do teams feel intimidated by pets?
Like one of those things, it's conceptual. We've complicated matters by putting pets in one umbrella category. So there's we just say pets. Everyone can use pets. Which pet? All pets. It's a bit of a loose definition that's not very clear about which pet for which use case. And so when people even attempt to understand what's going on here, they don't quite know where to start because it is very technical, right? On the one hand, you're telling me encryption is a pet. On the other hand, you're talking about differentially private synthetic data. So really, you're going from one end of a spectrum where it's easy to understand to something that's new and complicated and very hard to figure out how to use. So that's one. I think the real problem is we don't have enough use cases as yet. So we don't have enough success stories that are being developed by companies of different types, different sizes, different use cases, different industries, which will allow the legal teams then to understand exactly what the benefit is of implementing this technology. So I think that transition, again, is happening. I believe it will happen, but it isn't easy technology to sink your teeth into.
I think a lot of our clients are not the largest companies in the world, not the smallest, but not necessarily the largest. And I think in many cases, they might have a crisp sense of what they want to do with the data or how they might want to protect it. Maybe they have already implemented some easy pets, like they automatically hash, user data in their databases or their product or whatever. But let's say that's it. That's all they've managed, or that's all they can handle within their in-house product or IT or whatever teams. How can a company like that move forward with pet adoption when there's resource scarce or knowledge scarce when it comes to this topic?
I think that's a fair question. I think that is one of the challenges that makes pets intimidating, is that people don't have deep, privacy engineering as a role is not really one that you find in many, many companies. And so you don't have a privacy engineer easy to hound to just say, hey, can you check this out and figure it out for us? So most companies who figure out or learn about pets tends to come in from either the legal departments, the DPOs, the compliance teams. You've probably heard of it at a privacy conference. And so it's hard to translate that internally into a developed use case. If you're someone listening to the podcast wondering where to get started, I would say make sure you reinforce your external network and your internal support network, right? So you're going to need to do both simultaneously. So I would start by connecting with your local privacy chapters or groups or community, people that you talk to. It is becoming part of conversations at some of the bigger privacy conferences. Once you get through that step, I think the next one is looking at the resources that you can find. Like OECD has published some amazing stuff. The ICO has published great resources, and the NIST has as well. And once you're ready to actually look at some code, there are a lot of open source libraries. This is probably where you might need an engineering partner or like a technical person in your organization to partner with you on it. And once you have some buy-in, you can then start exploring the technical side. But also, like I keep saying, I think there are more and more startups in the pet space worth looking at. And these startups are solving for some of the most common but very niche use cases. For instance, in healthcare, wanting to mix data sets from two different sources across geographies. A lot of research is looking at this and wants to do this, but it's sensitive data and they can't. Or financial services, investment banking, working in silos. Investment banks that don't want to work in silos, want to share data, but want to do it in a privacy-preserving way. So if you explore the world of startups, you will find that some of the biggest use cases are being tackled and that plumbing is being built. But don't forget to build your internal social capital, because from different cross-functional teams to make this happen in your company. So you'll have to invest in relationships with the revenue team, the legal teams, the compliance teams, the technical teams, the DPO office to make sure everyone is bought in.
I mean, in many ways, I think very, very, very simply put, there will probably someday be a vendor for that, or a plugin for that, or maybe a plugin's too simple, but there will someday be a solution for that you can buy if you can't already, or as you say, open source, incorporate into your own code. You'll have to get budget for that. You'll have to get buy-in for that. Still a piece of technology. You'll still have to do your own analysis of it and make sure it's the right solution for your company.
Yes, doesn't take any of that away.
Are you seeing any pets in common use at the moment? Which ones are the most popular currently?
I think if you talk to a privacy audience about pets, I think the one that they'll probably be most familiar with is differential privacy. And I think that's because there's encryption, anonymization, the tools that you mentioned earlier, the options you mentioned earlier. And then I think differential privacy has taken that leap forward in a way that's unusual. And the reason it's easy to use and understand is because there's actually a mathematical number, an epsilon number that you can put on the level of privacy that you want. It's almost like a sliding scale. So if I had to pick, I would say differential privacy is probably being explored the most.
Any new ones on the block? What are you seeing on the horizon?
It's funny you asked that question because I'm starting to see more and more the trusted execution environments, which is a concept. Again, it's something that you have to use in your own way based on your use case. But TEEs are becoming, I think, more and more popular, especially in the age of AI. It's a hardware-based privacy-enhancing technology, which creates this isolated, secure area within a device's main processor to protect sensitive data. And I think the good thing about TEEs, it's almost like a digital safe or an enclave. And you get an attestation, which is cryptographic, to kind of confirm that this data has not been tampered with or the level of confidentiality has been maintained. So it's like you going back to Danie's brilliant analogies, this one is an easy one for most people, right? When you think of a box that's locked or a safe that allows you to put in types of sensitive data, have an assurance on the fact that it's not tampered, that it's all kept secure, it's computed, and then you get an output. People understand how that works.
I've been trying very hard to come up with an analogy for differential privacy because it is actually quite a difficult concept to explain. The way that I understand differential privacy is you add stuff to the data so that you can't say it's exactly this person's data. And to take it back to the classroom example, we've talked about the homework books being sent to the front. But if the teacher asks a question from the front and a person is too shy to give the answer, they feel much better if other people shout out at the same time. So instead of one person shouting out the answer, if you add 5 people to them, they don't feel so exposed. You can't identify them. The teacher can still get to the answer, but you've added noise to the answers that you can't figure out who said that. I think that works.
What is important, right? In your analogy, just kind of sticking to your brilliant ability to create these analogies, I'm going to pick some holes. But I think what is important? Is it the answer or who gave the answer? If it is the answer, then, by hearing a louder noise, you know that more children know the answer. And by hearing a quiet whisper from 3 kids, you know that they sort of know the answer, but not really. But if you are after who gave you the answer, that technology is not going to be helpful. And it is a great analogy, but it very much depends on what that teacher is looking for.
I'm moving away from analogies for a second. Monisha, I know you think about this a lot. You see this a lot. You're in a lot of conference spaces and you talk to a lot of people across this industry. Are there any specific sectors, industries, business models where you think they should really be thinking about adopting pets?
I said it before, I'll say it again. I think healthcare and financial services have made that leap. I think I'm starting to see more and more companies use pets there. And so if you are a healthcare or financial services related company, I think it's definitely time to look at pets carefully because it solves for some of your most pertinent use cases. I would say media and tech are probably coming along next. Retail, industries where you do need to use a lot of data to compute a lot of different values, I think we'll see the next wave of adoption. I would pay attention there.
I would imagine, too, an element of this is not just you should use it because it helps with privacy, but if you don't use it, you might be missing out on data sets and content and insights that you could fairly ethically, responsibly have access to if you were adopting pets and considering how to get to that.
I think a lot of the times there are misconceptions that if you use pets, it's going to be too expensive or it's difficult or, there's it's going to cut back on the utility of what you're trying to achieve because it's so privacy preserving that you actually can't do what you want to do with that data, which I think these are misconceptions. I'm not saying it's easy, but there is this triangle that we talk about in some of our conferences where this kind of ultimate goal of privacy, utility, and cost is something that can be achieved with pets. You have to go through a process of iteration and experimentation and have different conversations with different people to be able to find that right balance. But if there was something that would help you achieve that balance, it would be a pet, in our opinion. So it's worth considering. It's not a trade-off.
When it comes to regulation and compliance, you've talked about the GDPR and the fact that pets aren't a solution to a specific requirement in the GDPR, but I think it does play a role. It helps you to up your level of compliance if you're required to implement technical and organizational measures. One way to do that is by employing pets. How do you find regulators? What is their view on this at the moment? Should regulators stimulate more discussion around this?
Absolutely. So I think regulators are definitely jumping on the bandwagon. I think the more advanced ones have issued guidelines like the ICO. The PAPC in Singapore has opened a regulatory sandbox on pets. CNIL have been very vocal. I think it's part of that 3-year strategy. I think there are regulators who are starting to be more explicit about the fact that pets can help in data protection and privacy practices. I know a lot of regulators are thinking and talking about it, and especially in the AI context, I think I expect there will be something that's released or published or discussed for sure.
I think it's like in many places in privacy, the world is also moving so fast. I've heard criticism of the ICO guidance, but the ICO guidance was from 2023. So, I feel like the world has already moved again, and perhaps the ICO's perspective has also changed, but it takes so much time to put together formal guidance and get the stakeholders' involvement in what. So I think hopefully we'll see a lot more in the future, but it's a tough job being a regulator these days.
They're learning as we're learning.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure chatting to you. I hope that, we talk again in a year or two and there's clear guidance and everybody's able to quickly use analogies to describe all these complex technologies.
I want to echo what Kellie said. I hope we can have another opportunity to touch on maybe a different topic or maybe Pets 2.0 in future. That would be awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Privacy in Practice, brought to you by VeraSafe. We hope today's insights help you navigate privacy challenges with confidence and clarity.
If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future topics. Send us an email to podcast@verasafe.com.
And to learn more about VeraSafe's data protection and privacy services, you can visit us at verasafe.com.
Until next time, best of luck in approaching your privacy challenges in a practical way.
See you then.